How much experience do you need to teach Qigong? That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So I actually wrote an article about this as well, which you can find on the longwhitecloudqigong.com website. I'll put a link in the description below. But I'm going to talk about it as well because, well, sometimes people like to just watch a video and listen than read necessarily. And the process of talking, it's a little bit more informal, and often some different aspects of the topic will come out as well. So this topic is going to be, well, maybe a little bit controversial with some people. And that's because there are some quite different views on what is required to be a Qigong teacher. And I'm going to challenge some of those, particularly some of the ones that are embedded in maybe a somewhat mystical view of Qigong within this video, as I talk about it in a very practical and pragmatic way, which is the approach that I bring to my Qigong as well. Now, the spectrum of what some people think is required to be a Qigong teacher can range everywhere from doing a weekend course and then you're good to go, all the way through to essentially a very mystical sort of idea of almost like there's no way you can qualify yourself for it. You have to, almost become an ascended master of some sort and have the heavens open and a dove land on your shoulder, as a sign that you are now ready to be a Qigong teacher. That's probably right out at the extreme end, but there's some ideas that sometimes people have that are, okay, maybe not that extreme, but out in that direction, where there's kind of this implicit idea that Qigong is not something that can be learnt in a definable way. It's more something that comes as a gift, or like there's this mystical process in learning and understanding it. And well, people are free to have their views on that, but I don't think it's very helpful, actually, because when you take a mystical approach to something, it tends to stay a mystery. Something that is mystical, it's mystical because you don't understand it. Therefore, it's a mystery, mystical mystery, the same source word. Whereas if you have a practical understanding, you're able to understand things in much more definable ways and make much more tangible progress in your understanding, which then of course leads to more things that you won't understand. This is the process of learning things, is, when you can learn things in good solid ways, it then opens you up to being able to explore further things, rather than if you stay keeping even basic things a mystery, you're not going to go far in being able to explore other things, if that's sort of your general approach and view. And so there's this spectrum of what people expect and think, from everywhere from, just go and do a couple of classes or a weekend workshop and you're good to go, you can start teaching, right through to some very unrealistic expectations of essentially, needing a lifetime of experience before you can start teaching. But if that was the case, well, we'd have very few teachers. There'd be very little ability to spread knowledge and understanding of Qigong. And in my opinion, it's really simply not true. We can gain a practical understanding of Qigong in a much shorter period of time. And once you have that understanding, well, you're able to start to share that with other people once you have a solid understanding. Now, part of that is that, so Qigong, of course, is an embodied practice. So that means that it's not just theoretical knowledge, it's something that we experience within our bodies, and it has tangible effects within our bodies. So our mind, body, and energy, but a big part of that equation is our body. And so to really be able to do justice to teaching of Qigong, you need to have that experience of what the practices do within your body, within your mind, and to your energy. But again, that doesn't necessarily take decades and decades, or even years and years to gain. But it is important to have that to some degree before you start teaching, because otherwise you might teach just from the point of view of theoretical knowledge, and you might have it wrong because you don't have an actual experience to connect it to. But once you have that balance of the theoretical knowledge, the understanding of the actual principles of Qigong, and have, to whatever degree, your own experience of them, so you have a reference point to make sure you're on track with what it is that you understand for yourself, there's no reason why you can't then start to share that with others as well. And how you feel about that, or how you think about that, really, again, it comes down, I think, at least partly, to how mystical your approach to this whole process is. Some people seem to think that to be a Qigong teacher, you need to be some kind of guru, having sort of absolute supreme knowledge, or sort of some kind of divinely given knowledge before you can then start to share anything. But again, I don't think that's healthy, because no one's actually going to end up with this perfect knowledge. We're all going to be continuing to explore, to learn, to develop through our lives. And the only people who are going to then hold them out to be these gurus, if that's the expectation of, what's going to be required to teach, are people who are willing to lie, willing to deceive other people and say, yes, I'm this divine, masterful thing, I'm this guru, I have the knowledge. Either that, or people who are delusional themselves, and they've deluded themselves. They're not necessarily lying, but they've deluded themselves into thinking that they have some supreme... I think a much healthier way to look at this is to think of a teacher, or yourself as a teacher, if you're planning to teach Qigong or already teaching Qigong, as a guide, not a guru, not a source of the knowledge yourself, but rather someone who just helps to point whoever it is who you're teaching or is being taught towards the knowledge that is already there, or rather the information that is already there. Because the principles of Qigong, the underlying theory of it, is manifest in nature, all around us. So we don't have to... Well, none of us is going to be the source of that, right? Because it's all around us, it's already there. And all we need to do is help point people towards different aspects of this so that they can deepen their own understanding and move forwards in their path of learning. I think when we take this approach, it puts us on a much more level and much healthier relationship between teacher and student. Instead of having the teacher up here and the student down here, having to kind of listen and follow everything that the teacher says, we recognize that both of us are in this process of life. Both of us are experiencing and learning. And hopefully the teacher has some useful things. They don't necessarily have all the answers, some divine special knowledge, anything like that, but they have some things that are useful that they can share with the person who's learning. And equally, the person who's learning might have some really good knowledge about something else, right? And having knowledge about one thing doesn't make you in any way superior to someone who's learning that from you. They might have fantastic knowledge and experience about something else. It just means you've got something useful to share with them. It doesn't necessarily need to take all that long to gain enough knowledge, enough experience, that you have something that's really useful to share with other people. The best way, I think, to gain that knowledge is to have a really solid understanding of principles combined with your own experience of your own practice. Often people, again, they get this idea that it needs to take a long, long time in order to have enough to be able to teach. And this comes from the idea that, experience accumulates over time, which it certainly does. And there's so much within Qigong practice units, this vast field, there's so much to discover that you'll keep on learning and developing for the rest of your life. I'm over a couple of decades in at this point, and I'm still learning huge amounts regularly because there's so much to explore. And there's just no getting away from that. You'll keep on learning. But we don't need to we don't need to know everything before we start to teach. We just need to know enough that's going to help people along on their path of learning and exploring as well. One of the downsides of thinking that it necessarily takes a long time before you're able to teach is for people to focus on that process of time rather than the knowledge and experience acquired. And because sometimes people they can practice for a long time, but without a really good understanding of the underlying principles, their progress is generally going to be pretty slow, right? And they will still gain an experience over time, certainly. They'll develop over time. But understanding those principles helps you to focus your attention, focus your awareness, focus your practice in ways that's actually going to lead to a richer practice, a richer understanding much more quickly. And so having a solid understanding of principles means you'll develop that understanding, in a much, much shorter period of time. And then even after that, you'll continue to develop it further. So it's a win-win-win-win. It gets you a great head start, and then you continue to develop after that. But you've developed from it, a much more solid foundation, rather than someone who's kind of just doing the practices without that solid understanding of principles. So I think to be a teacher, it's really important to do some formal study of principles and theory that underlines Qigong and Qigong practices, so you can get a grasp of them. And then you do need to combine that with having your own experience of the practices, so that you actually know what they're doing. And then when you have those two things, well, you should be in a good position to start teaching. And as I've said several times at this point, of course, at that point, you'll continue to learn and develop. Yeah. And what will happen is you'll become a more experienced, more knowledgeable teacher as you gain more understanding of the nuances of a practice and so on. You'll gain more. But that doesn't mean you're not ready at a certain point. You just get better with time, better with more experience. So how long then should it take to be ready to be a teacher? To some extent, this is how long is a piece of string. You can come up with different opinions for that, absolutely. Look, my initial training, which wasn't just Qigong, it was traditional Chinese medicine and Qigong, but with a big focus on Qigong. That was 3,000 hours of study. And I already had experience of Qigong prior to that. That was 3,000 hours of formal study. Does that mean everyone needs 3,000 hours of study before they can start teaching Qigong? Of course not. And other people might think, 3,000 hours, that's not quite enough, different opinions on that. But there are some sort of reasonable expectations to have of, again, having this balance between an understanding of principles, which really empowers the practice, and then your own personal experience of the practice. Within Long White Cloud Qigong, which is the Qigong school that I run and teach through, we do a lot of instructor training courses. And the way we have these set up is the courses are 200 hours. And the inspiration for that has come from the yoga community, where the 200-hour certification has become sort of a recognized minimum standard. And I think it's a reasonable sort of a minimum standard by all means. That doesn't mean there's not more to learn, because again, we offer multiple different courses. So you can do 200 hours focus on one set of practices, then 200 hours focusing on another set of practices, and then we have some others in the works. We'll be able to do another 200 hours focusing on more. There's more to learn and develop, absolutely. But as a baseline, within that period of training, there is enough time to study principles and really get a framework to understand the practices that you're working with, and then also to do the practices and really experience them for yourselves, of course in a supervised way, which again really helps to facilitate your development through that practice, because you have the opportunity to ask questions and get clarifications, not just on the theory but on what you experience doing the practices, and get refinement of your practice and so on. And within that 200 hours, certainly my experience has been working with people come out the other end of that with a pretty good understanding of the practices they're focusing on. And as part of reviewing people's experience on the courses, I always ask them, you've come to the end of the program. If you're wanting to teach, because not everyone does the programs planning to teach. Some people do it just for their own benefit in their practices, which is really healthy as well. That creates a really solid base just for your own practice. By learning enough and comprehensively enough that you could teach, you're setting yourself up really well for your own practice. So, not everyone's wanting to teach, but I always ask, having come to the end of the program, if you're wanting to teach, do you feel like you have enough to make a start at doing that? And the answer is always yes, generally a very emphatic yes, and that they have more than enough to start that process of teaching. Sometimes people then also want to go, I have enough. I want to spend a bit more time consolidating my practice. I want to just deepen into it a little bit first before I actually start practicing. That can be healthy as well. And again, some people come to the courses having already practiced for some time beforehand, but putting in this piece of formal learning, structured learning and practice over a period of time really helps to bring their understanding and experience of their practice together, that they're then able to then teach that much more clearly to other people, and have confidence in their own understanding and ability to do that. So I think we strike a good balance there. And again, the inspiration for that specific standard comes from the yoga community, and that's sort of been adopted. That sort of general standard 200 hours as a minimum starting point has been adopted in other areas outside of yoga as well, because it has been, it's been quite successful within that community. And that's not the end of someone's learning, growing, as a teacher. They can and should continue to develop by continuing to study, continuing to work with their own practice, and that can go a lot further. But that formal study, it turns out people who some of my students have been very successful in their teaching. They've really developed really well as part of that. And it's so good to now see the impact that they're having on other people around them in their community, helping them with their health, their general well-being, vitality. It's fantastic to see the ripple effect that it has, spreading out and sharing Qigong with other people all over the world, actually, through Long White Cloud Qigong. And, if each of those people thought, hang on, they have to wait until they have a whole lifetime of experience or decades of experience before they could start teaching and sharing, well, so many less people would be able to benefit from the really good, solid, valuable knowledge and experience that they do have to share. So anyway, that's just a few thoughts on this topic of how much experience you need to start teaching Qigong. And remember, there's a difference between starting and then becoming more expert over time and developing in your mastery and your expertise. I don't really like the term master. Sometimes in the field of Qigong, people talk about, being a master. I'm not so fond of that term. Sometimes people refer to me as a master. I'm not so fond of that term, because really I see it as an ongoing process of development and mastery, continuing to learn for yourself, for your own practice, and for your teaching, continuing to learn and develop within that. Anyway, we do have some more Long White Cloud Qigong instructor certification programs coming up soon. We've got 2 starting early next year. So there's a small universe Qigong program, which focuses, it's very much on the fundamental flows of energy within the body, which is like great foundational knowledge to understand, and practices that go with them. So it works with a process of activating the energy within our body, then working with the organ meridians, the dantian, the extraordinary meridians, and the energy field, and then bringing awareness of our energy flow into our daily lives. We also do some work with breath work and meditation for Qigong and so on. So a lot of really good foundational aspects of Qigong in that. So that one, I think it's towards the end of January, that one starts. And then we have another one starting, I think it's early March, which is on inner fire Qigong, which the inner fire practices are much more dynamic practices. So we do a lot of quite dynamic breath work for activating our energy and cleansing, refining our energy with that inner fire breath work. We do wild animal play Qigong, which are quite physically active, dynamic, moving practices, which really circulate the energy very strongly, really good for processing energy and releasing blocked or stuck energy. We also do iron shirt Qigong, which we do that primarily from the point of view as a health practice. But again, it's a dynamic, strong practice. It's completely scalable though. So it's the type of practice, its nature is dynamic and strong. But because you can scale it, it means that someone who's like a top level athlete, they can do those Iron Shirt Qigong practices and it can be really challenging for them. It can be like, man, push themselves to their limit doing it. But equally, someone who has been sick, has been worn down, and is wanting to build themselves up, the same process helps to rebuild them. And they can do them at a much lower level, but that's suitable for them for rebuilding their health and the strength and vitality and the resilience of their energy. We also cover a lot of breathing theory in a Fire Qigong program, which really helps to understand the use of breath in different Qigong practices, as well as how it applies to your own life. So I'll put links to the details for those in the description below. If you're interested in those, you can check out. There's some early bird prices, on certain dates for that as well that you can have a look at if that's something you're interested in. Anyway, I hope you found the vlog interesting. Again, I do realize for some people this will be controversial. Some people have some sort of quite set ideas of like, no, you've got to be decades before you can start teaching. My experience has been that often, as I've referred to already, often even having that approach to thinking about the process of teaching leads to mysticizing the whole topic and slows down the process of developing. Now, decades of experience is awesome, right? To accumulate more experience over time, absolutely. But recognize that Qigong is something you can learn. It is something you can do. It doesn't have to take forever. You can start getting the benefits much sooner. You can start getting the understanding much sooner. And as long as you don't think you have to be a guru, all you think you need to be is a guide, it doesn't need to take that long before you can actually start teaching as well, particularly if you engage in some formal practice to really bring your understanding together. So yeah, hopefully that's been interesting. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, all those good things, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.